This video will be about the book of Genesis, an introduction to the book in its entirety, and in specific, just chapter 1. The next video then will look at Genesis 2 and 3, and these two videos together will help you as you prepare for your reading of Genesis 1 through 3, which is part of your assignment this week. The very first book of the Bible is named Genesis. It's a Greek word that means beginning. Interesting, it's a word in English that we don't limit for the discussion of the Bible. We can say the genesis of this class was last week. We still use the word. It's simply a vocabulary word that means beginning. But here's the confusion. The book of Genesis, please understand, is not about God's beginning. The Bible has the existence of God a priori. That is, it's an assumption. It's always been. Genesis is a book about our beginning, the beginning of humanity. God has always existed, says a Christian. God did not begin with the book of Genesis. We did. Genesis also stands in great contrast to other Near Eastern mythologies of the time about how it all came to be. By contrast, all other mythologies had sort of a chaotic, out of chaos came goodness and order kind of thing. Out of the mud came Marduk, who conquered the thunder god or whatever. The biblical book of Genesis is quite different in that way. Genesis 1 wants to make it very clear to the reader that we are not here as a byproduct of chaos, but rather this was all intentional, ordered, and perfect. So, the way Genesis 1 is told is ordered and intentional and perfect. This is one of the wondrous things about ancient Hebrew writing. The medium was the message. For the ancients, if we were going to write about a perfect, ordered world, then our writing couldn't be chaotic and happenstance. It would have to be perfect and ordered, because the medium comments on the message. I want to show that to you now, but one other thing. The other thing when we come to Genesis 1, at least for the first 3 days, is remember that the sun will not be created until the 4th day. So it's almost logically impossible to talk about a day, or the Hebrew here, a yom is the word, not so much as a 24-hour day. That can't be possible till the 4th day. All of this, you see, is happening sort of outside of time. And please remember that when we think about biblical time, especially as it pertains to God, we humans are finite and we live in 3 dimensions. If you will, let's just pretend that this pencil is our life, and living in a linear world of 3Ds, we can say that I was born here. Here's when I get hit by a bus and die. And today I'm somewhere here on a continuum. And I exist in a linear 3-dimensional form of time. The Bible, of course, says that it knows that we're human and we're limited by this 3D existence. But it also tells us to remember that God, because he exists outside of time, can also take this, whatever length of my life is, or era or history or whatever timeline this might be, and look at it not this way, but now look at it this way. So that 1,000 ages in your sight is like an evening gone. So we sort of have to let go of our 21st century Western preconceived everything and give respect to the text and enter it as it asks us to. Here we go. So if the world is going to be created perfect, one of the first numbers you need to learn about the Bible is the number 7, the perfect number. 7 in the Bible is always perfection. Interestingly, we'll take just a little side trip here. 7 is 4 plus 3. And if you take 4 times 3, you get 12, which will always be then the biblical number of completion of people. There'll be 12 tribes of Israel, 12 disciples of Jesus. In Revelation, when you have the number of heaven, it's 12 times 12, 144,000. 12 is always a completion of people. 3 times 4. 3 plus 4, 7 is the perfect number. And while we're on numbers, so if 7 is perfect, 1 less than 7 is imperfect, 6. And the only thing worse than 1 6 would be 3 6s, the sign of the Antichrist in Revelation. And then one more thing about numbers. 12 is the number of completion of people, but the number of completion of things is 10. How many commandments are there? 10. We could think of other things. In the next video, I'll give you another fun number 10 that we'll see in the book of Genesis. So here, just remember, 7 is perfect. 6 then would be imperfect. 10, the number of completion of things. 12, the perfect number completion of people. Why did I bring that up? Because would you believe the very first sentence in Hebrew of Genesis 1 has an exact 7 characters, 7 words. The writer immediately wants to say, you see, this is going to be a perfect story, and the way I'm telling you is perfect. And then would you believe the second sentence has exactly 14. Second sentence, 2 times 7. And there we go. The writer immediately wants to say, I'm going to tell you this perfect story that's intentional, balanced, beautiful. And then we get into the 6 days of creation. Please note, there's not 7 days of creation, there's 6. The 7th day is a day of non-creation, the day God rested to make it a perfect 7. But the first 6 days of creation then are the days of forming and then the days of filling. Another beautiful way to show the balance. Day 1, lights will be formed. Day 2, water and earth will be formed. Day 3, dry ground and vegetation is formed. Okay, so put that in this column. But then 3 corresponds to 1 corresponds to 4. On the first day, lights were formed. So on the 4th day, lights are filled. Moon, sun, stars. On day 2, water and earth. Well, then, balancing that, day 5, everything which teems in the waters and flies in the air. Day 3, dry ground and vegetation. Remember that? Well, then day 6, it's filled, forming and filling this perfect balance. And on day 6, livestock, creatures, animal, and then the apogee, humanity, made in the image of God. Interestingly, the Hebrew word there for image is literally statue. So we see 7 words, 14 words, 3 days of forming, 3 days of filling. Getting the picture of how beautifully the story is told. We could say perfectly, because it's commenting on a perfect world. And then before we continue with chapter 1, just to gild the lily here, each of those 6 stories of forming and filling, the 6 days, is itself then told in a perfectly balanced way. We call this chiastic structure. To explain that, stick with me here, let's go back to English. In English, if I have 3 independent clauses in one sentence, we can do that. So I could say, I'll make up a story here of 3 lines. Randy got up, Randy had breakfast, Randy drove to the office. And we wouldn't know what the point of that story was because there's 3 independent clauses. It could be about today was the day I woke up, that's good. Today I had a great breakfast, or today I had no problems driving into here to the office. Hebrew kind of has the same issue. So what the Hebrew writer did to point out what the point of that story would be is he would usually, or she, make a 5-sentence story or a 5-component story, might be a better word. So to illustrate this in English, what if I said, Randy had breakfast, Randy got up, excuse me, Randy had breakfast, Randy drove to the office, Randy had dinner, Randy went to bed. Now, do you notice in those 5 components that 1 and 5 kind of correspond, A and A prime? This one was getting up, this one was going to bed. And that B and B prime sort of corresponded. Randy had breakfast, Randy had dinner, both about eating. So that leaves one thought in the middle that is so important that it has no complement. This is chiastic structure, and by that way, when the Hebrews told a story in this matter, it was a signal to the reader, a literary device, that the point of the story is driving to the office. It's in the center, and it's perfectly balanced with the 2 other components. We'll see chiastic structure everywhere in Hebrew writing. Sometimes 5, sometimes 3, sometimes 7, sometimes chiastics within chiastics, but it was all intentional, and that's my point. So what's the point of these 6 days of creation? They're each told in this perfectly balanced chiastic structure. There was evening and morning. God said, it was. God saw, it was evening and morning. It's incredible. We have this perfectly balanced structure, chiastic structures. By the way, it's interesting too that for such ancient texts, to this day, everything is sequentially correct. Other creation mythologies of the time sort of got it wrong. In other words, some other mythologies might say something like trees were created and then the next day there was ground, and that kind of is illogical scientifically. Notice please, the Bible gets it all right. There had to be ground and water and sun before there could be trees, just for one example. And it's all correct. 14 different conditions, and Genesis 1 scores a 14 out of 14 in getting them all correct. I just find that amazing. And then we get near the 27th, then after the 6 days of, the 3 days of forming, 3 days of filling, the 6th day, God rests, perfect 7 days. I hope you're seeing this by now, this beautiful prose. And then in the 27th sentence, God comes and leaves a special grouping there by the writer to leave no doubt that the pinnacle of creation was that statue of God, the human. And in verse 28, please notice the amazing thing already here in the first page of the Bible, that God then comes to humanity. God did not come to any other creature. And right there on the first page of the Bible, we have the message of Christianity. Unique message that God comes to humanity. God initiates. Why do I mention this? Because in almost every other religion of the world, bar none, you have to go find God. Other religions of the world teach that you must go inside to find peace. You must go to Totem. You must go to Mecca. You must go to a mountain. You must make a holy place. You must encant. The subject of all those sentences are you. Christianity is the only religion of the world where the subject is not you, but God. God comes to you. And that is brought out here already in Genesis 1. The whole thesis, the whole message. It's told in perfect manner because creation of the world is a perfect thing. The medium is the message for the Hebrews. We've learned words like Genesis, which means beginning. We went over, we also learned the word chiasm, which actually comes from a Greek word meaning X, a key, because in the middle is this point of the story. We talked about numbers, 7, 6, 10, 12, 12 times 12, 144,000. We talked about days of forming and filling. And we talked about the main thesis of Christianity, which is that God comes to you. That's the introduction. And now I'm excited to take you just to 2 more chapters, and then we'll have to leave the creation story. So this will set you up to read Genesis 1. I know you'll enjoy it now, and I hope that this was helpful to see more color in what you read. And I'll see you next time for Genesis 2 and 3.